and close your eyes and simply become aware of all sounds that are going on without making any special attempt to name them or identify them. Let the vibrations in the air play with your eardrums. Don't be uptight. We are not very particular about what sounds, but just listen to the whole natural flow of sound as you would listen to music. And if you find that you can't help thinking about it, putting names on it, or supposing you can't stop vagrant thoughts about what you're supposed to do tomorrow, what somebody said to somebody, and so on, don't resist the flow of thought. Just let it join with the random sounds that you hear and regard it as a kind of interior noise. Don't bother about what it means. It helps to keep your tongues relaxed, floating easily in the lower jaw, and also to stop frowning. Be easy and relaxed in the space in the center of the forehead. And if I should say anything, attend rather to the sound of my voice than to the meaning of my words. Your brain will take care of understanding what I'm saying, and you don't need to worry about it. The brain is smarter than the mind. So you let go of your mind, let it think whatever it likes. Let go of your ears, let them hear whatever they like. And also, there's another way in which you're playing with the air. Lungs. Let them breathe as they feel like breathing. Don't force anything. As the song says, I'm not sleepy, and there is no place I'm going to. Where's your hurry? So the function of the gong. The gong is a compelling sound, which might be said to be a unitive principle. And all these other sounds you now hear might be said to represent multiplicity, one and many. And you can, by listening to the gong really fade out, see how one turns into many. Most people breathe in a completely shallow way because they never really empty their lungs. And most people, when they do breathing exercises, they don't accomplish much because they make too much effort. Effective energy, like, say, the energy of the ocean, always takes the path of least resistance. It follows gravity. So very gently would you try the experiment of allowing your breath to fall out. Let it go out in the same way as you would nestle yourself down into an extremely comfortable bed, where you sink in and in and in, and you let it flow out through your lips, so that you will know by the feel of air on your lips that you are really breathing and not just straining your muscles. And at the point where the out-breath runs into any kind of discomfort, stop it. And let the in-breath return. Don't pull it back, but let it come back as a reflex. Or you could imagine that inside your neck is a big ball of lead, and you let that drop through your body, pushing the breath out as it goes, until it reaches the floor, at which point you let it fall to the center of the earth. Let the in-breath return and take another lead ball, and drop that one. None of this breathing is supposed to have any symbolism or meaning. We are just breathing. In fact, of course, in this short space, I'm showing you things that might normally go on for a considerably longer time. But we can only sample tonight. We use another gimmick in meditation. In this meditation, like we are doing now, where there's a certain emphasis on the sense of sound. It's called mantra. This is a really untranslatable Sanskrit word.
Have heard of Zen. But before going on to explain any details about it, I want to make one thing absolutely clear. I am not a Zen Buddhist. I am not advocating Zen Buddhism. I'm not trying to convert anyone to it. I have nothing to sell. I'm an entertainer. That is to say, in the same sense that when you go to a concert and you listen to someone play Mozart, he has nothing to sell except the sound of the music. He doesn't want to convert you to anything. He doesn't want you to join an organization in favor of Mozart's music as opposed to, say, Beethoven's. And I approach you in the same spirit as a musician with his piano or a violinist with his violin. I just want you to enjoy a point of view which I enjoy. Now then, when that's been said, and I hope it's put your minds at rest, let me give you, first of all, some simple historical information. Zen is a form of Buddhism. It originated in China about 500 AD, and about 1200 AD it migrated to Japan, where it exists today. And it is it's a way of life that has had an immense influence on the arts and on the culture, the poetry and architecture of the Far East. It has lately become of enormous interest to many people in other parts of the world. Now, normally when one talks about Buddhism, and Zen is a form of Buddhism, it is supposed that you're talking about a religion. and people are apt to classify themselves as Buddhists, as they might say, I am a Catholic, or a Methodist, or a Baptist, or an Episcopalian, or a Jew. But that is rather misleading. Buddhism is not a religion in that sense. If we want to find an equivalent to Buddhism in our society today in the West, probably the nearest thing to it is psychotherapy. When a person goes to a psychiatrist or a psychoanalyst to work out a serious personal problem, not because he's just nutty, I mean, not necessarily because he has hallucination or excessive singing in the ears with no clear physical origin, but when a person feels that his whole life is somehow disoriented and wrong, and he doesn't go to the preacher because the preacher only moralizes to him and says, my man, you should have more faith in God or something. So he goes instead to a doctor because in our day, a man with the tag of science on him has more prestige than a man who has the tag of religion. And so when a psychiatrist goes to work on you, his objective is more or less to change your state of consciousness. That is to say, if your state of consciousness, your state of mind, is one of being day after day constantly depressed, the objective of going to a psychiatrist or a psychotherapist is to have your state of consciousness changed to one of happiness. Now, in a somewhat similar way, the objective of Buddhism in all its forms is to bring about a fundamental change in a human being's everyday state of consciousness. If I make it yet more specific, it's to bring about a change in your sense of personal identity. That is to say, in your sensation of who and what you are. And in this way, Buddhism, which I suppose you know, is a method of changing consciousness, discovered or invented by a man called Gautama, who lived in India shortly after 600 BC, who was given the title Buddha because the word means the awakened one, the man who woke up. And therefore, that very title suggests that ordinary people are asleep. I remember a very wise man who used to give lectures like this. And when he came in, he used to be silent, and he'd look at the audience, and he'd gaze at everybody in the audience particularly for a long time, and everybody would begin feeling vaguely embarrassed. And when he'd gazed at them for a long time, he'd say, "Wake up! You're all asleep. And if you don't wake up, I won't give any lecture." Now, in what sense are we asleep? The Buddhist would say that almost all human beings have a phony sense of identity, a delusion, a hallucination as to who they are. I'm terribly interested in this problem of identity, and I try and find out what people mean when they say the word I. I think this is one of the most fascinating questions. Who do you think you are? Now, what seems to develop is this. Most people think that I is a center of sensitivity somewhere inside their skin. And the majority of people feel that it's in their heads. The civilizations in different periods of history have differed about this. Some people feel that they exist in the solar plexus. Other people feel that they exist about here. But in American culture today, or in Western culture in general, most people feel that they exist in here. with various dials and buttons and things which enable him to influence the arms and legs and to get all sorts of information from the nerve ends. And that's you. So we say in popular speech, I have a body. Not I am a body, but I have one, because I am the owner of the body in the same way as I own an automobile. And I can take the automobile to the mechanic, and occasionally in the same way I have to take my body to the mechanic, the surgeon, the dentist, the doctor, and have it repaired. But it belongs to me, it goes along with me, I'm in it. A child, for example, can ask his mother, Mom, who would I have been if my father had been someone else? That seems a perfectly simple and logical question for a child to ask, because of the presumption that your parents gave you your body, and you were popped into it, maybe at the moment of conception or maybe at the moment of birth, from a repository of souls in heaven, and your parents simply provided the physical vehicle. So that age-long idea that is indigenous, especially to the Western world, is that I am something inside a body, and I am not quite sure whether I am or am not my body. Some doubt about it. I say, I think, I walk, I talk, but I don't say I beat my heart. I don't say I shape my bones. I don't say I grow my hair. I feel that my heart beating, my hair growing, my bone shaping is something that happens to me. And I don't know how it's done. But other things I do. And next, I feel quite surely that everything outside my body is quite definitely not me. There are two kinds of things outside my body. Number one is other people. And they're the same sort of thing as I am. But also they're all little men locked up inside their skins. And they're intelligent, they have feelings and values, and are capable of love and virtue. But the number two is the world that's non-human that we call nature. And that's stupid. It has no mind. It has emotions, maybe, in animals. But on the whole, it's a pretty grim business. Dog eat dog. And when it gets to the geological level, it's as dumb can be. It's a mechanism. And there's an awful lot of it. And that's what we live in the middle of. And the purpose of being human is, we feel, to subjugate nature, to make it obey our will. And we arrived here, we don't feel that we belong in this world. It's foreign to us. In the words of the poet Houseman, I, a stranger, am afraid, in a world I never made. And so all around us today, we see the signs of man's battle with nature. I'm living at the moment in a marvelous house in the Hollywood Hills. And we are overlooking a lake. And on the other side of the lake, the whole hill has suddenly been interrupted with a ghastly gash, where they have made level lots for building tract homes of the kind you would build on a flat plain. This is called the conquest of nature. These houses will eventually fall down the hill because they are causing soil erosion, and they're being maximally stupid. The proper way to build a house on a hillside for something flat and then going and living there. You can do that already on the ground. So the more people live in the hills, the more they spoil the hills, and they're just the same as people living in the flat ground. I mean, how stupid can you get? Well, anyway, sense of identity, of our phony feeling that we are something lonely, locked up in a bag of skin, confronted with a world, an external, alien, foreign world that is not me. Now, according to certain of these great ancient philosophies, like Buddhism, sensation of being a separate, lonely individual is a hallucination. It's a hallucination brought about by various causes, the way we're brought up, being the chief of them, of course. I remember as a child, and you probably have very similar memories to mine, that all our parents were desperately interested in identifying us. Don't you remember that sometimes you went out and played with other children, and there was someone in the group of other children you admired and looked up to, and you came home imitating the mannerisms of that other child. And your mother said to you, Johnny, that's not you, that's Peter. And you felt a little bit ashamed, because somehow you had let her down. Mother. But now I don't want you to do it because I say so, but because you really want to. Or you must be free. See, this comes into politics. Everybody must vote. You see, imagine you're members of a democracy, and you must be members of a democracy. See, you're ordered to. Crazy. Also, thou shalt love the Lord thy God. Is that a commandment or a joke? You know, if you suggest that the Lord is joking, most people in our culture are offended because they have a very moronic conception of God as a person totally devoid of humor. the Lord is highly capable of joking, because joking is one of the most constructive things you can do. So, when you are told who you are, and that you must be free, furthermore that you must survive and must go on living, and that becomes a kind of compulsion, you get mixed up. It's very simple. Of course you get mixed up. If you think you must do something, which will only be the thing required of you if you do it freely. These are the sort of influences then that cause human beings all over the world to feel isolated, to feel that they are centers of awareness locked up in bags of skin. Now, this sensation of our identity can be shown and demonstrated to be false by some of the disciplines of our own science. When we describe a human being or any other living organism from a scientific point of view, all that means is that we're describing it carefully. We are going to describe very carefully what a human being is and what a human being does. All right. And we find that as we go on with that description, we can't describe the human being without describing the environment. We can't say what a human being is doing without also saying what the world around him is doing. Just imagine for a moment that you couldn't see anything up here except me. You couldn't see the curtains behind me. You couldn't see the stage. You couldn't see the microphone. You could only see me. That was all you could see. What would you be looking at? You wouldn't see me at all, because you wouldn't see my edges, and my edges are rather important for seeing me. My edges would be identical with the edge of your eyesight, with that vague oval curve, which is the field of vision. And what you would be looking at would be my necktie, my nose, my eyes, and so on, but you wouldn't see my edges. So you'd be confronted with a very strange monster, and you wouldn't know it was a human being. Because to see me, you need to see my background. And therein lies a clue of which we are mostly ignorant. In Buddhist theory, the cause of our phony sense of identity is called avidya, and that means ignorance. Although it's better to pronounce it ignorance. Having a deluded sense of identity is the result of ignoring certain things. So when you look at me, and I manage by behaving up here in a kind of a more or less interesting way, I cause you to ignore my background because I concentrate attention on me. Just like a conjurer, a stage magician, in order to perform his tricks, misdirects your attention. He talks to you about something he's doing here, and he talks to you about his fingers and how empty they are, and he can pull something out of his pocket in plain sight and you don't notice it. And so a magic happens. That's ignorance. Selective attention. Focusing your consciousness on one thing to the exclusion of many other things. So in this way, we concentrate on the things, the figures, and we don't concentrate on the background. And so we come to think that the figure exists independently of the background. But actually, they go together. And they go together just as inseparably as backs go with fronts, as positives go with negatives, as ups go with downs, and as life goes with death. You can't separate. So there's a sort of secret conspiracy between the figure and the background. They are really one, but they look different. They need each other, just as male needs female, and vice versa. But we are ordinarily completely unaware of this. So then, when the scientist starts paying attention to behavior of people and things carefully, he discovers that they go together, that the behavior of the organism is inseparable from the behavior of its environment. So you see, if I'm to describe what I am doing, what am I doing? Am I just waving my legs back and forth? No, I'm walking. And in order to speak about walking, you have to speak about the space in which I am walking, about the floor, about the direction, left or right, in relation to what kind of room, what kind of stage, what kind of situation. Because if there isn't a ground underneath me, I can't very well walk. So the description of what I am doing involves the description of the world. And so the biologist comes to say that what he is describing is no longer merely the organism and its behavior. He is describing a field, which he now calls the organism-environment. And that field is what the individual actually is. Now, this is very clearly recognized in all sorts of sciences, but the average individual, and indeed the average scientist, does not feel in a way that corresponds to his theory. He still feels as if he were a center of sensitivity locked up inside a bag of skin. The object of Buddhist discipline, or methods of psychological training, is, as it were, to turn that feeling inside out, to bring about a state of affairs in which the individual feels himself to be everything that there is, the whole cosmos, focused, expressing itself here. And you, as the whole cosmos, expressing itself there, and so on. That what, in other words, the reality of myself fundamentally is not something inside my skin, but everything, and I mean everything, outside my skin. But doing what is my skin and inside it. I mean, imagine that every one of us, look, in the same way that the sea, when the ocean has a wave on it, the wave is not separate from the ocean, is it? Every wave on the ocean is the whole ocean waving. The ocean waves and it says, I'm here, see? But I can wave all over the place. I can wave in many different ways. I can wave this way, and wave that way. So the ocean of being waves every one of us. And we are its waves. But the wave is fundamentally the ocean. Now, in that way, your sense of identity will be turned inside out. You wouldn't forget who you were, wouldn't forget your name and address, your telephone number, your social security number, and what sort of role you're supposed to occupy in society. But you would know that this particular role that you play, this particular personality that you are, is superficial, and the real you is all that there is. The object of Buddhist discipline or methods of psychological training is, as it were, to bring about a state of affairs in which the individual feels himself to be everything that there is, the whole cosmos, focused, expressing itself here. Now, in that way, your sense of identity would be turned inside out. You wouldn't forget who you were, you wouldn't forget your name and address, your telephone number, your social security number, and what sort of role you're supposed to occupy in society. But you would know that this particular role that you play, this particular personality that you are, is superficial, and the real you is all that there is. And that inversion, turning upside down of the sense of identity, of the state of consciousness which the average person has, is the objective of Buddhistic disciplines. The method of teaching something in Buddhism is rather different from methods of teaching which we use in the Western world. In the Western world, a good teacher is regarded as someone who makes the subject matter easy for the student. A person who explains things cleverly and clearly. So you can take a course in mathematics without tears. In the Oriental world, they have an almost exactly opposite conception, and that is that a good teacher is a person who makes you find out something for yourself. In other words, learn to swim by throwing the baby into the water. There's a story used in Zen about how a burglar taught his child to burgle. He took him one night on a burgling expedition and locked him up in a chest in the house that he was burgling and left him. And the poor little boy was all alone, locked up in the chest, and he began to think, how on earth am I going to get out? So he suddenly called out, "Fire! Fire!" And everybody began running all over the place, and they heard this shriek coming in from inside the chest, and they unlocked it, and he rushed out and shot out into the garden. And just then everybody was in hot pursuit, calling out, "Thief, thief!" And he went by a well, and he picked up a rock and dropped it in the well. And everybody thought, the poor fellow has jumped into the well and committed suicide. And he got away. And got home, and his father said, "Congratulations, you've learned the art." So do you see, William Blake once said, "A fool who persists in his folly will become wise." And so the method of teaching used by these great Eastern teachers is to make fools persist in their folly, but very rigorously and very consistently and very hard. So then, if I may, now having given you the analogy, the image, let's go to the specific situation. Supposing you want to study Buddhism under a Zen master, what will happen to you? Well, first of all, let's ask the question, why would you want to do this anyway? I can make the situation fairly universal. It might not be a Zen master that you go to. It might be a Methodist minister. It might be a Catholic priest. It might be a psychoanalyst. But what's the matter with you? Why do you go? And surely the reason that we all would be seekers is that we feel some disquiet about ourselves. Many of us want to get rid of ourselves. We can't stand ourselves. And so we watch television and go to the movies and read mystery stories and join churches in order to forget ourselves. In order to merge with something greater than ourselves. We want to get away from this ridiculous thing locked up in a bag of skin. So I have a problem. I hurt. I suffer. I'm neurotic or whatever it is. And one goes to the teacher and say, my problem's me. Change me. Now, if you go to a Zen teacher, he'll say, well, I have nothing to teach. There is no problem. Everything's perfectly clear. And you think that one over. And you say, he's probably being cagey. He's testing me out to see if I really want to be his student. So I know, according to everybody else who's been through this, that in order to get this man to take me on, I must persist. Do you know our saying, anybody who goes to a psychiatrist ought to have his head examined? There's a double take in that saying, you see. So in the same way, anybody who goes with a spiritual problem to a Zen master defines himself as a nut. And the teacher does everything possible to make him as nutty as possible. But the teacher says, quite honestly, I haven't anything to tell you. I don't teach anything. I have no doctrine. As I said to you at the beginning of this talk, I have nothing whatsoever to sell you. So the student thinks, this is very deep, because this nothing that he's talking about, this nothing that he teaches, is what they call in Buddhism shunyata. Now shunyata is the Sanskrit for nothingness, and it's supposed to be the ultimate reality. But as you know, if you know anything about these doctrines, this doesn't mean real nothingness, not kind of just nothing there at all, not just blank, but it means no thingness. It's the transcendental reality behind all separate and individual things, and that's something very deep and profound. So he knows that when the teacher said, I have nothing to teach, he meant this very esoteric no thing. Well, he might also say then, if you have nothing to teach, what are all these students doing around here? And the teacher says, they are not doing anything. They're just a lot of stupid people who live here. And he knows again, you see, the stupid doesn't mean just straight stupid, but the higher stupidity of being people who are humble and don't have intellectual pride. So, finally, the student, having gone out of his way to define himself as a damn fool, in need of help, he's absolutely worked himself into this situation. He's defined himself as a nut. And then the teacher accepts him. And the teacher says, now, I'm going to ask you a question. I want to know who you are before your father and mother conceived you. That is to say, you've come to me with a problem. And you've said, I have a problem. I want to get one up on this universe. Now, who is it that wants to get one up? I mean, who are you? Who is this thing called your ego, your soul, your I, your identity, for whom your parents provided a body? Show me that. And he says further, I'm from Missouri, and I don't want any words, I want to be shown. So, the student may open his mouth to make an answer, but the teacher says, not yet. You're not ready. And he takes him back, introduces him to the chief student, all those so-called Zen monks who live together. And the chief student says, now what we do here is so-and-so, we have this discipline, but the main part of the discipline is meditation. And we all sit cross-legged in a row, and we do that. And you sit cross-legged and you learn how to breathe and be still. In other words, to do nothing. No, but you mustn't go to sleep, and you mustn't get into a trance. You have to stay wide awake, not thinking anything, but perfectly doing nothing. And there's a monk walking down all the time with a flat stick, rather long, about so long. And if you go to sleep, or if you get into a trance, or if you get dreamy, he hits you on the back, so that you'll stay quite clear, wide awake, but still doing nothing. And the idea is that out of this state of profoundly doing nothing, you will be able to tell the teacher who you really are. In other words, the question, who are you before your father and mother conceived you, is a request for an act of perfect sincerity and spontaneity. As if I were to say to you, look, will you be absolutely genuine with me? No deception, please. I want you to do something that expresses you without the slightest deception. No more role acting, no more playing games with me. I want to see you. Now imagine. Could you really be that honest with somebody else? Especially a spiritual teacher. And you know he looks right through you. He sees all your secret thoughts. And he knows the very second when you've been a little bit phony. And that bugs you. Just like the psychiatrist. You're sitting in there discussing your problems with him and you start picking your nose. And the psychiatrist suddenly says to you, is your finger comfortable there? You like that? Showing. What do fingers symbolize? What do nostrils symbolize? Uh-oh, uh-oh. And then you quickly put your hand down. And you say, oh no, it's nothing. It's nothing. I was just picking my nose. Well, that's the whole art of psychoanalysis. And it's Zen, it's the same thing. In other words, when you're challenged to be perfectly genuine, it's like saying to a child, now darling, come out here and play, don't be self-conscious. Or it's like I would say to you, now look, if you come here tonight at exactly midnight and put your hands on this stage, you can wish and have granted any wish you want, provided you don't think of a green elephant. And so everybody will come, they'll put their hands here, and they will be very careful not to think about a green elephant. Well, now do you see the point? That everybody, if we transfer this to the dimension of spirituality, where the highest ideal is to be unselfish, to let go of oneself. When you are trying to be unselfish, you're doing it for a selfish reason. You can't be unselfish by a decision of the will, any more than you can decide not to think of a green elephant. There is a story about Confucius, who one day met Lao Tzu, a great Chinese philosopher. And Lao Tzu said, sir, what is your system? And Confucius said, it is charity and love of one's neighbor and elimination of self-interest. Lao Tzu said, stuff and nonsense. Your elimination of self is a positive manifestation of self. The stars keep their order. The trees and plants grow upwards without exception. The waters flow. Be like this. All your nonsense about elimination of self is like beating a drum in search of a fugitive. So in this way, these are all examples of the thing, the trickery the master is playing on you. You came to him with the idea in your mind that you are a separate, independent, isolated individual. And what he is simply saying to you is, show me this individual. I had a friend who was studying Zen in Japan, and he got pretty desperate to produce the answer of who he really is. And on his way to an interview with the master to give an answer to the problem, he noticed a very common sight in Japan, a big bullfrog sitting around in the garden. And he swooped this bullfrog up in his hand and dropped it in the sleeve of his kimono. And then he went into the master, and to give the answer of who he was, he suddenly produced the bullfrog. And the master said, too intellectual. In other words, this answer is too contrived. It's too much like Zen. You've been reading too many books. It's not the genuine thing. So after a while, what happens is this. When the student finds that there is absolutely no way of being his true self, not only is there no way of doing it, there is also no way of doing it by not doing it. You can't do it by doing something. You can't do it by not doing something. Let me, to make this clearer, put it into Christian terms. Thou shalt love the Lord thy God. Now what are you going to do about that? If you try very hard to love God and you ask yourself, why am I doing this? You find out you're doing it because you want to be on the side of the big battalions. You want to be right. After all, the Lord is the master of the universe, isn't he? And if you don't love him, you're going to be in a pretty sad state. So you realize I'm loving him just because I'm afraid of what will happen to me if I don't. Then you think that's pretty lousy love, isn't it? And you think, that's a bad motivation. I wish I could change that. I wish I could love the Lord out of a genuine heart. But why do you want to change? See, I realize that the reason I want to have a different kind of motive is that I've got the same motive. So I say, oh heaven's sakes, God, I'm a mess, and will you help me out? And then he reminds you, why are you doing that? Now you're just giving up, aren't you? You're asking someone else to take over your problem. So you suddenly find, you see, you're stuck. So in this way, what is called the Zen problem, or koan, is likened to a person who swallowed a ball of red-hot iron. He can't gulp it down and he can't spit it out. Or it's like a mosquito biting an iron bull. It's the nature of a mosquito to bite, and it's the nature of an iron bull to be unbiteable. And both go on doing their thing, that is their nature. And so nothing can happen. Absolutely you're up against it. Absolutely no answer to this problem. No way out.
watching your emotions, so that you begin to build up a sense of separation between the watcher and what is watched, so that you are, as it were, no longer carried away by your own stream of consciousness. You remain the witness, impassive, impartial, suspending judgment and watching it all go on. That seems to be something like progress. At least you're taking an objective view of what is going on. You are beginning to be in a position to control it. But just wait a minute. Who is this self behind the self, the watching self? Can you watch that one? It's interesting if you do. Because you find out, of course, that this is just as the problem of grace is nothing more than a transposition of the first problem. How am I to be unselfish? By my own power. It becomes how am I to get grace by my own power. So in the same way, we find that the watching self or the observing self behind all our thoughts and feelings is itself a thought. That is to say, when the police enter a house in which there are thieves, the thieves go up from the ground floor to the first floor. When the police arrive on the first floor, the thieves have gone up to the second, and so to the third, and finally out to the roof. And so when the ego is about to be unmasked, it immediately identifies with the higher self. It goes up a level, because the religious game is simply a refined and highbrow version of the ordinary game. How can I outwit thee? How can I one up thee? So, if I find, for example, that in the quest for pleasure, the ordinary pleasures of the world, food, sex, power, possession, all this becomes a drag. And I think, no, it isn't there. So I go in for the arts, literature, poetry, music. And I absorb myself in those pleasures. And after a while, they aren't the answer. So I go to psychoanalysis, you see. And then I found out that's not the answer. And I go to religion. But I'm still seeking what I was seeking when I wanted candy bars. I want to get that goodie. Only I see now that of course it's not going to be a material goodie. All material goodies fall apart. But maybe there's a spiritual goodie not going to fall apart. But in that quest, the quest is not different from the quest for the candy bar. Same old story. Only you've refined the candy bar, made it abstract and holy and blessed and so on. So it is with the higher self. The higher self's your own ego. And you sure hope it is eternal, indestructible and all-wise. But then the great problem is how to get that higher self working. How does it make any difference to what you do and what you think? I know all kinds of people who've got this higher self going, practicing their yoga. But they're just like ordinary people. Sometimes a little worse. And they can fool themselves. They can say, for example, well, my point of view in religion is very liberal. I believe that all religions have divine revelation. But I don't understand the way you people fight about it. You fight, say that we Jehovah's Witnesses have the real religion. Others say, well, we Roman Catholics have it. And the Muslims say, no, it is in the Quran. And this is the right way. And And somebody else gets up, and he may be a rather highbrow Catholic, and say, well, God has given the Spirit through all the traditions, but ours is the most refined and mature. And then somebody comes along and says, well, as I said, they're all equally revelations of the divine. And in seeing this, of course, I'm much more tolerant than you are. You see how that game is going to work? See, I can take this position. Supposing you regard me as some sort of a guru. And you know how gurus hate each other. They're always putting each other down. And I can say, well, I don't put other gurus down. See, that outwits all of them. See, we're always doing that. We're always finding a way to be one up. And by the most incredibly subtle means. So you see that, you see? And you say, I realize I'm always doing that. And tell me, how do I not do that? I say, why do you want to know? Well, I'd be better that way. Yeah, but why do you want to be better? You see, the reason you want to be better is the reason why you aren't. Shall I put it like that? We aren't better because we want to be. Because the road to hell is paved with good intentions. Because all the do-gooders in the world, whether they're doing good for others or doing it for themselves, are troublemakers. On the basis of kindly let me help you or you'll drown, said the monkey, putting the fish safely up a tree. We white Anglo-Saxon Protestants, British, German, American, have been on a rampage for the past 100 or more years to improve the world. We have given the benefits of our culture, our religion, our technology to everybody, except perhaps the Australian Aborigines. And we have insisted that they receive the benefits of our culture, even our political styles, our democracy. You better be democratic, or we'll shoot you. And having conferred these blessings all over the place, we wonder why everybody hates us. See, because sometimes doing good to others, and even doing good to oneself, is amazingly destructive. Because it's full of conceit. How do you know what's good for other people? How do you know what's good for you? If you say you want to improve, then you ought to know what's good for you. But obviously you don't. Because if you did, you would be improved. So we don't know. It's like the problem of geneticists, which they face today. I went to a meeting of geneticists not so long ago where they gathered in a group of philosophers and theologians and said, now look here, we need help. We now are on the verge of figuring out how to breed any kind of human character we would want to have. We can give you saints, philosophers, scientists, great politicians, anything you want. Just tell us what kind of human beings ought we to breed. So I said, how will those of us who are genetically unregenerate make up our minds what genetically generate people might be?
But it means basically a different perspective, as I've been talking about. So to begin with, we're going to have a look at the infinite. And right here is a representation of the infinite. It is space. It goes on forever. There literally is nothing yet to experience because nothing has been created. There is just foreverness and nothing more. And as you can tell, this is a really boring place because there is absolutely nothing to do. So we have to start somewhere. So let's make our first point of reference. This point represents infinite consciousness expressed as one. this, we have now created two circles, along with something new. These two beings of awareness have created something called the vesica piscis. This shape is often referred to as the womb of creation. It represents creation, transformation, change, and bringing forth new life. You see, by creating the vesica piscis, using the 2 points that already exist, we've actually created two more, one at the top and one at the bottom, where the two circles intersect. And by connecting these points up, we get our first straight edge shape, the equilateral triangle. Not just one, we get two. A reflection, a little bit like the two circles, but now in the form of triangles. Essentially, a reflection within the reflection. This is also where you will first see the feminine giving birth to the masculine, which is really just like us. When we are in our mother's wombs, we all first start out female. It's only at a later stage when our hormones kick in that we actually decided that we are going to continue being female, or we're going to develop into a male. But we always first start out being female. Anyways, going back to the observation that we have created two more points through the intersection of the circles. These 2 points are exact copies of the parents, and just like the parents, they are too self-aware because they have limitations. They realize that there is a boundary, and they therefore can explore that and have a space within it. So, we can create another circle, just like we did with the parents, and again, until we end up back at the beginning. What we have here is something called the seed of life. The seed of life is a shape that represents third-dimensional reality through movement and spin. You see, if the central circle was white and all the surrounding circles were a different color of the rainbow, if you were to spin this really fast, you would have the perception of seeing white light. It's just an illusion. It's just how our eyes perceive this movement. So really, the key here is spin. And by spinning this object, what you also get is something called the tube torus. The tube torus can be seen as one of the most foundational shapes in existence. It is found everywhere. It's all through nature. It is the shape of the electromagnetic field of a body, or the magnetic field of the earth. Cut open an apple and you'll see the same shape. It's everywhere when you start looking for it. It's even in your box of donuts. You see, the tube torus is a pretty magical shape. It's the only shape that can fold in on itself and have the same properties of a circle, because its boundaries go on forever. It never ends. It's a shape of infiniteness, but in a whole different level. What's also created within the tube torus is the idea of a left spin and a right spin. If you look up something called scalar physics or torsion field physics, you'll find a whole bunch of intense stuff on this. But it really actually makes sense at the level we're talking about here. So another thing I'd like to mention about the seed of life, what is created with the seed of life, is if you were to make this a third-dimensional model instead of the two-dimensional image you see here, we get something called the egg of life. Funny enough, this is a shape that we see in the first stages of development in all multicelled organisms, and that means you and everything that you know as an animal or a plant. But doesn't it make sense when this shape actually represents bringing forth into the third dimension? So, going back to the 2D perspective, the seed of life, if we were to take and put another layer of circles around the outside in the same way that we did the first time, what we would get is something called the flower of life. The flower of life is a very ancient symbol and is found all over the world in ancient monuments and places of sacred interest everywhere. In fact, I've even found it here in my local city of Leicester here in the UK. Anyways, with the flower of life comes a variety of new symbols and concepts, including something called the tree of life. But I'm not really going to be covering that here because there's a lot of information to it. But what I'm going to say is that this flower of life, I kind of see as more of a transition symbol to something new, to an idea of a new perception, a new way of observing reality. And that's kind of what it does, because like the seed of life into the flower of life, if we were to create a new set of circles all the way around, connecting up to points as we have done before, what we get is something called the fruit of life. Now, the fruit of life is usually shown like this, only showing these circles, but that's for a particular reason, because if you were to take the center of each circle and connect them up with one another, what you would get is something called Metatron's cube, which looks like this. Metatron's cube could be considered the ultimate masculine aspect of structural reality, where the female counterpart would be the fruit of life, as we've seen before. Again, this is an example of a masculine form being born from a female form, just from a higher perspective. So the interesting thing with Metatron's cube is if you were to dissect this, you would get 5 subshapes, what's called the Platonic solids. These 5 shapes are the 5 shapes that are literally the building blocks of physical reality. These are the only shapes in existence where all points will touch the inside of a sphere, along with all faces and all edges being equal to each other. There are other shapes out there that also have these properties, but they've only been created from cutting down the corners of these shapes, so still, these are the 5 original foundational shapes. Everything that you can experience around you, including the floor that you're standing on, or the computer that you're using, or the chair that you're sitting on, all are made of these shapes, on a very, very basic level. If you look at the elemental table, it has actually been found that every single element on the elemental table can be reduced down to one of these 5 Platonic structures. Just by knowing this, I'm sure you can see how much power this information holds. So, the first Platonic solid we're going to look at is the hexahedron, or as it's best known as, the cube. The cube represents solidity, power, control, the physical, really anything to do with structure. The cube is also highly associated with the element of Earth, and also the planet Saturn. There's a huge amount of information out there on the correlation between Saturn and the cube, and I'm probably going to do a future video on this, but for now we are just going to take note of that. So another thing I'd like to mention about the cube is how it is quite different from the rest of the Platonic solids, and the fact that it could actually be seen as the father of all shapes, whereas the sphere is the mother of all shapes, because the cube, like the sphere, will nestle all of the other Platonic solids inside perfectly. Again, this is another expression of the masculine and feminine qualities of reality, the straight edges and angles of the masculine and the curves of the feminine. So, the next shape we're going to look at here is the tetrahedron. Now, the tetrahedron is usually shown in one of 2 ways, either on its own or with its twin, which is called the star tetrahedron. And this is one of the reasons that makes this shape special, because it is the only shape in the Platonic solids shown within Metatron's cube that is inverted, where it's got a twin, it's got a mirror, which is quite reminiscent when we first came across the triangle from when we had the Vesica Pisces, because if you remember, it also had a twin. The tetrahedron, particularly when it's shown on its own, is considered also to be the closest shape to God, because it is the shape that has the smallest amount of sides possible, so therefore it's the closest thing to the non-physical. The tetrahedron, like the triangle, represents creation, transformation, change, and even initiation. The tetrahedron and triangles also have been long associated with the element of fire. In fact, you can even see this represented in modern day fire safety, where you have the fire triangle, which depicts the 3 elements of combustion. So the next shape we're going to look at is the octahedron. The octahedron is a shape that represents communication, mind, and thought. This shape is also associated with the element of air and also time itself. In fact, when you have a moment, check out what's called the delta T antenna that was used in the Montauk project. And you'll see how this has actually been used in the past to affect time and space. Very interesting stuff. Something else that I'd like to mention is there's quite a lot on the internet to suggest that the Great Pyramids of Egypt aren't actually as they appear. They may actually be octahedrons, just half buried in the sand, which would give a very different perspective of the energetic qualities that these things would hold and what they would project. So moving on, the next shape we have here is called the icosahedron. The icosahedron is a shape that represents nurture, the emotions, and is also associated with the element of water. In fact, this is a structure that's mapped across the planet that creates the original ley line structure. One of the first people to rediscover this information was a man called Ivan Sanderson, who was on a hunt to try and find where all the disappearances were across the planet, such as places like the Bermuda Triangle. Well, when he connected all these points up, what he found was a perfect inverted icosahedron. And within this icosahedron, you will find 12 triangles, which he calls the 12 vital vortices. The other thing I'd like to mention about the ley line structure is that how most ancient monuments, including the pyramids of Giza and Stonehenge and most ancient old churches and everything, are all lined up on this grid structure. It's as if the ancient civilization knew the energy that this structure could harness. However, since then, the rest of Platonic solids have also been added to create the full ley line structure that's now studied today. If you do your research, you'll probably find all of these incorporated. So, moving on to the last of the Platonic solids, the dodecahedron, what you'll find here is something a bit different. The only way we can express this shape through a two-dimensional perspective is by adding these lines here, which is a bit different to how we've actually created the other shapes. You see, technically to get these lines, you have to make this shape three-dimensional. So therefore, this shape represents moving into another dimension. It represents the ether, and it represents the cosmos, space. Funny enough, actually, scientists have in recent years discovered that by measuring background radiation from the Big Bang, they actually are now starting to believe that the universe could be in the shape of a dodecahedron. Somehow, I don't think it's a coincidence. So, anyway, that is the last of the Platonic solids. So, really, how does this information help you in everyday life? Well, when you have a moment, sit back, take a look at your situations, take a look at everything in your life, and just reflect on it and see if you can actually match some kind of geometric concept with it. One way or another, you will eventually be able to match everything geometrically. And by having a perspective like this over your problems, you start to see them in a different light. They start reacting differently. They don't really become problems anymore, they just become either messengers or they just become experiences. It's all about a learning experience rather than about hindrances. So I hope you got something out of this. I hope this made a little bit of sense. And if it didn't, oh well, watch it again. Why not? The more times you watch something, it makes more sense sometimes. I'm sure you've watched a few films like that. You've had to watch it 3 or 4 times to really get the whole storyline. Well, this can be kind of like that. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed the video. And if you'd like more information about this, or more information about sessions or training, please visit...
Always with you cannot be done. Do you nothing that I say?
Master, moving stones around is one thing. This is totally different.
No different. Only different in your mind. You must unlearn what you have learned.
Alright, I'm gonna try.
No. Try not. Do. Or do not. There is no try. Size, do you? And where you should not. For my eye is the force, and a powerful light is. Life creates it, makes it grow. Its energy surrounds us and binds us. Luminous beings so be. Not this crude matter. You must feel the force around you. Between you, me, the tree, the rock, everywhere. Yes, even between land and ship.
You are the impossible.
there's nowhere you're supposed to be, there's nothing you're supposed to do, there's nowhere you're supposed to go, and you find you're in an eternal here and now. That's your way of discovering who you are.
Of how the universe works and what man's place in it is. I want you to do something that expresses you. No more playing games with me. I want to see you.
nobody can say what it is because the real world is unspeakable. And there's nowhere you're supposed to be, nothing you're supposed to do, there's nowhere you're supposed to go, and you find you're in an eternal here and now. That's your way of discovering who you are. Of how the universe works and what man's place in it is, I want you to do something that expresses you. No more playing games with me. I want to see you.
we desire with technology, we are, as it were, blowing up our image of ourselves to enormous proportions, and many of us are beginning to realize that we don't like it. We discover ourselves to be beings that are hostile to the environment and that are bent on dominating it to the point of destruction. That we don't feel at home in the universe. We feel that our skin, at the very least, is a boundary between a palpitating, sensitive consciousness that's terrified of what's outside the skin and terrified of a good deal that's inside it, like bacteria and cancer cells, weak arteries, cholesterol, what have you. So we have this strange thing that Lancelot White called the European dissociation, the feeling of oneself as a prisoner, involuntarily so, in a hostile world that does not give a damn about our egos. And therefore, when news comes from all about, whether it be from the Orient or whether it be from experiments with psychedelic drugs, when news comes that this feeling of our own existence may be a hallucination, people prick up their ears and would like to know, is there some other mode of consciousness which one can be in, which is not this alienated mode? Because we feel, I think many of us, very, very strongly, that if there is such a place, we would like to be there. That, of course, entails difficulties, which we shall go into. But this is the starting point of the fascination for yoga, for Zazen, and also for the Taoist forms of meditation, which are much less known. But there arise problems about this when we are going to convey these disciplines to Western people. Because Western people who are interested in things of this kind are apt to be very interested. Whereas on the other hand, in cultures where things of this kind have been known for thousands of years, there is a tendency for them to become rather rotish. And therefore, the way of teaching these disciplines, which many Asian teachers use, are designed not for mature adults, but for relatively young people who are not interested in learning. In other words, when a kind of religion, let's take the case of Zen Buddhism, or in Chinese it is called Chan, when after some years pious people have followed these disciplines and learned to enjoy them, they have a way of telling their children that you ought to enjoy this too, see? And we would like you to go to the monastery. And furthermore, when there's the superstitious feeling that raising a son to be a monk or a priest redounds to one's own good merit in future lives, the more sons you send into the priesthood, the better. It's the same in Catholic countries. It was the same among the British in the Anglican Church during the 18th century when the first son of the family went into the law, because he had then a good chance of being a successful politician. The second son went into the army, and the third son went into the priesthood. And it was a matter of course. And they had no real interest in religion. They weren't really curious. It was something they were studying out of filial duty to their parents. And especially in these days in Japan, when in order to inherit your father's temple, you have to go to the monastery and take Zen training. It becomes a matter of some urgency. So you have a lot of unwilling young men, sometimes young women, and nunneries, learning the meditative disciplines boys' boarding school in England. I can assure you I've had enough of it. We were very sternly disciplined in the same way as Zen monks are disciplined in Japan today. And it just strikes me as funny that I have what I call the aching leg school of Zen, in which one sits in Zazen for an unnecessarily long time until one gets paralyzed. And then people come back from Japan or from anywhere and brag about how their legs hurt, as if it was some extremely esoteric discipline. And you know, they bang them about with boards on the shoulder, and like in England, they swipe them on the bottoms with canes. And it's all the same old story. And I think we need to go beyond this, develop a certain maturity towards the practice of meditation. It is not based on all this boys' boarding school business. But it's very difficult to make people who have been brought up in that system see the point. Because they say, well, we got it this way, and that's the way you have to go in order to get it. So, we have discussed this matter, and we feel that there can be an approach which does not insult the dignity of interested Western adults. Or some people love to have their dignity insulted because they think it's good for them, because it's going to subdue their egoistic pride. But nothing is more egoistic than the project of subduing your egoistic pride. We can read it straight out of Zhuangzi in the dialogue between Lao Tzu and Confucius, or, you know, it's an apocryphal dialogue. Zhuangzi was a great humorist, and he used the most outrageous stories and examples to illustrate his points. And so he put into the mouth of Confucius all sorts of things that Confucius would never have dreamed of saying. But he also arranges a dialogue between Lao Tzu and Confucius in which Confucius gets the wrong end of the stick, where Lao Tzu talks to him and asks him, what is your teaching? And he says it is charity and duty to one's neighbor and absence of self. Well, he said, sir, you are causing great disruption in the empire. Is not your elimination of self a positive manifestation of self? You are like somebody beating a drum in search of a fugitive. I mean, we would say, it is like the police about to raid a whorehouse with the sirens on, so that everybody hears them coming and runs away. You see? So in the same way, when you go after with a project to eliminate yourself, nothing could be more in the nature of spiritual pride. And you will work on it, and the more you work on it and get uptight and stiff, the more your spiritual bulge increases. So in Taoist doctrines, there is a principle called Wu Wei. And this means Wu means none or not, no, negation. Wei has a combination of meanings. It can mean action, making, but the best translation I have found for it is forcing. And so Wu Wei is the principle of not forcing in anything that you do. Now we know when we watch any performance of an artist, be it a dancer or an actor or a musician, we know immediately when the performance is forced. And we say it doesn't ring true, it's too artificial, it doesn't seem to be natural. Many people who study Taoist doctrines think that Wu Wei means do nothing, in the sense of laissez-faire, be lazy, always be passive. It doesn't mean that. There is a time for action. When you study judo, you use muscle only at the right moment. When your opponent is hopelessly overextended and off balance, and you add a little muscle to it and you throw him across the room. But only then. never use muscle at the wrong moment. For as Shakespeare knew perfectly well, there is a tide in the affairs of men which, taken at its flood, leads on to fortune. And so Wu Wei is based on knowledge of the tide, the drift of things. Get with it. Wu Wei is the art of sailing rather than the art of rowing. So, if you say now, one of the most famous sayings in the Lao Tzu book is superior virtue has no intention to be virtuous, and thus is virtue. Inferior virtue cannot let go of virtuosity, and thus is not virtue. So one could also say, the real Wu Wei is not intentionally Wu Wei, and so is Wu Wei. But inferior Wu Wei so tries to be Wu Wei that it isn't. In other words, this is saying Wu Wei is not a matter of cultivated passivity, or even of cultivated spontaneity. Because there are people who think that they are released, that they have realized that they are the Tao, as all of us in fact are, or that you are, to put it into Vedanta terms, every one of us is the Brahman, the eternal self of the universe, beyond all description or classification or thought. They say, okay baby, I'm that, now I'm going to have a ball. Well, what kind of a ball do they have? Well, what they do is they look up the rules on which society runs and do the opposite. Well, that's still running by the rules of society, but it's the mirror image in reverse. That's not spontaneity. You have to be able to realize that you don't know what you really want to do until you are very quiet. And it tells you. So, to quote Jesus, unless you become again as a child, you cannot enter the kingdom of heaven. And if you read the Bible, incidentally, which is a very dangerous book, as I'm going to be demonstrating in Playboy this December, but understand heaven in a very literal sense. Space. See, we are in heaven now because the earth is a spaceship and heaven is space. What is called in Chinese Gung, Japanese Gu, the void. That's what is important. That most of us don't know this. Even Shakespeare has one of his characters saying, oh, that this all too solid flesh would melt. But do you know you are much more space than you are anything else? If the ponderable, I won't say matter, the ponderable whatever in your bodies were condensed and all put together, it would be smaller than the point of a pin. And anyway, somebody once said, even a bishop is 80% water. We are airy nothings. So space is somehow very, very fundamental. We'll go into this further away, but you understand that heaven is space. And all those references in those nursery rhymes that we learned as children, which were the hymns about heaven. Always we're talking about thrones and crowns and harps and streets of glass. Crystals.
transparency. Space. It comes down to space always. Space, which nobody can define, nobody can imagine, appears to be nothing, is the foundation of the universe. But you have to become again as a child to see that. Now go back to your childhood. What were the fascinating things? What's out there? What's beyond the stars? How long does it go on? And Mama said, it goes on always and always and always. The child wonders. He's excited. That there's something that never ends. Then the child asks about time. How long ago is long ago? Well, the Bible says that in the beginning God created the heaven and the earth. Well, what did God do before he did that? Well, as one person said, he sat out thinking punishments in hell for people who ask silly questions. But still, that's only a joke. And the child thinks of God going back and back and back forever. But never begin. So in the same way you think about death. Go to sleep and never wake up. Never. Why, it would be as if you never had existed. Not only you, but everything else. Which is, of course, the way things were before you were born. You just turn it backwards. How about waking up after having never gone to sleep? That's quite a thought. There's something fishy about it all. Ichthys, Jesus Christos, Ios, the fish. So we get a funny feeling when we think those questions really through. Very funny feeling. And children, you see, love to get into that funny feeling. Children do all kinds of weird things. They like to spin around as fast as possible, so they watch suddenly the whole ground goes tilting. They do this thing, with their eyes, and they go. And make faces and test out their bodies in all sorts of funny ways, because they know from the beginning that the world is weird. A strange thing, because everybody knows what it's all about, only they won't admit it. Being brought up, being taught not to admit it, because you know very well what's going on. But in order to find out once more as an adult, you have to become again as a child. So what does that involve? It means, ladies and gentlemen, would you please check your ideas and opinions at the door? First of all your philosophical and religious views, all your logic. Because I say check it at the door advisedly, because you can pick it up again when you go out if you feel unsafe without it. I'm not trying to argue you out of your opinions and views. I'm merely suggesting that for the sake of an experiment, temporarily suspend it. And view what is as if you didn't even know how to talk. Red is not red, blue is not blue. Hard is not hard, soft is not soft. Male is not male, female is not female. There is just this jazz. It will not be possible to compel yourselves into this way of looking at things, because what Buddhists call habit is going on. And as I talk, you will find yourselves thinking in a compulsive and habitual way. This is red, this is green, this is something, this is nothing, this is solid, this is space. Alright, but treat those thoughts that are going on in your head don't get agitated that this is an anti-intellectual point of view, that this is undermining the value of logic and reason and so on. We'll bring all that back later when we need it. But just for the time being, let's simplify. Close your eyes. Listen. What is it? What do you really and truly, honest, hear? Don't name it. Just as if it were music. Classical. Can you hear the past? Can you hear the future? Can you hear the listener? Where do the sounds come from? Ears alone, no mama, no hands. Let them tell you the truth. You may be talking to yourselves. Don't try to repress it, as I said, just disregard it. That happens, it's like an itch. Really listen. Dig that sound.
New Orleans. It's so good to be back here. It feels good in here, yeah?
The chair has 4 legs. Now, an animal has one-track mind. For instance, the animal is coming after you with the idea of tearing your head off. You put the chair up, and all of a sudden he has 4 points of interest. He loses his original chain of thought because this agitates him. He can't comprehend those 4 points of interest. So what he does, he attacks the chair. He takes his wrath out of the chair. His mind now has been completely distracted from his original thought. He's the man in the white pants. Come in, Mitch. Caesar. Mongo, Mitch. Hold it. try to keep the animal afraid of you in that he does not understand you. He does not understand that you're weaker than him. If you get injured during a wild animal hunt, you have to go ahead and finish the act. If you stop right there and leave the cave, the animal is liable to comprehend that he has hurt you. That's it for that animal. Because physically, there's no way to really stop him except for you can't really stop him at all if he knows his real strength.
Exist in the real world. For example, in the real world, there aren't any things, nor are there any events. That doesn't mean to say that the real world is a perfectly featureless blank. It means that it is a marvelous system of wiggles in which we descry things and events in the same way as we would project images on a Rorschach blot or pick out particular groups of stars in the sky and call them constellations as if they were separate groups of stars. Well, they're groups of stars in the mind's eye in our system of concepts. They are not out there as constellations already grouped in the sky. So in the same way, the difference between myself and all the rest of the universe is nothing more than an idea. It is not a real difference. And meditation is the way in which we come to feel our basic inseparability from the whole universe. And what that requires is that we shut up. That is to say, that we become interiorly silent and cease from the interminable chatter that goes on inside our skulls. Because you see, most of us think compulsively all the time. That is to say, we talk to ourselves. I remember when I was a boy, we had a common saying, talking to yourself is the first sign of madness. Now, obviously, if I talk all the time, I don't hear what anyone else has to say. And so in exactly the same way, if I think all the time, that is to say, if I talk to myself all the time, I don't have anything to think about except thoughts. And therefore I'm living entirely in the world of symbols and am never in relationship with reality. Alright, now that's the first basic reason for meditation. But there is another sense, and this is going to be a little bit more difficult to understand, why we could say that meditation doesn't have a reason, or doesn't have a purpose. And in this respect, it's unlike almost all other things that we do, except perhaps making music and dancing. Because when we make music, we don't do it in order to reach a certain point, such as the end of the composition. If that were the purpose, to get to the end of the piece, then obviously the fastest players would be the best. And so likewise, when we're dancing, we are not aiming to arrive at a particular place on the floor, as we would be if we were taking a journey. When we dance, the journey itself is the point. When we play music, the playing itself is the point. And exactly the same thing is true in meditation. Meditation is the discovery that the point of life is always arrived at in the immediate moment. And therefore, if you meditate for an ulterior motive, that is to say, to improve your mind, to improve your character, to be more efficient in life, you've got your eye on the future and you are not meditating. Because the future is a concept. It doesn't exist.
Let's go, just walk through the light. I'm in favor, you're in danger, just walk through the light. If you need me, I'll be there, just walk through the light. From the darkness, I will save you, just walk through the light. Walk through the light, walk through the light.
As the proverb says, tomorrow never comes. There is no such thing as tomorrow. There never will be. Because time is when we stop talking to ourselves, stop thinking, we find there is only a present, only an eternal now. So, it's funny then, isn't it, that one meditates for no reason at all, except we could say for the enjoyment of it. And here I would interpose the essential principle that meditation is supposed to be fun. It's not something you do as a grim beauty. The trouble with religion, as we know it, is that it is so mixed up with grim beauties. We do it because it's good for you. It's a kind of self-punishment. Well, meditation, when correctly done, has nothing to do with all that. It's a kind of digging the present. It's a kind of grooving the eternal now. And brings us into a state of peace where we can understand that the point of life, the place where it's at, is simply here now. Well, now, in the art of meditation, there are various props, supports. One thing that we are going to use as a means of stilling chatter in the mind is pure sound, and for that reason, it's useful to have a gong. This is a Japanese Buddhist gong made of bronze and shaped like a bowl. Or you can use your own voice, chanting. Another prop in meditation is the use of incense. And that is because the sense of smell is our repressed sense. And because it's our repressed sense, it has a very powerful influence on us. And therefore we associate certain smells with certain states of mind. And so the smell of incense is associated with peace and contemplation. And so it's advantageous to burn incense in meditation. The other prop is a string of beads. And these beads are used in meditation for an unconscious method of timing yourself. Instead of looking at a watch, you move a bead each time you breathe in and out, so that at a certain rate, see, there are always 108 beads on a rosary, and when you get to slow breathing, halfway around the rosary is about 40 minutes, and that is the usual length of time for which one sits in meditation, because otherwise you get uncomfortable and you get stiff legs and problems of that kind. Now then, the other thing, first of all, that we have to go into is how does one sit in meditation? You can sit any way you want. You can sit in a chair, or you can sit like I'm sitting, which is the Japanese way of sitting. Or you can sit in the lotus posture, which is more difficult, which is cross-legged, with the feet on the thighs, soles upwards. And the younger you start that in life, the easier you'll find it to do. Or you can just sit cross-legged on a raised cushion above the floor. Now the point of this is that if you keep your back erect, I don't mean stiff like this, nor slumped like this, but just easily erect, you are centered and easily balanced, and you have a feeling of being thoroughly rooted to the ground. And that sort of physical stability is very important for the avoidance of distraction and generally feeling settled. Here and now, j'y suis, j'y reste, as the French say. I'm here and I'm going to stay. Well now, the easiest way to get into the meditative state is to begin by listening. If you simply close your eyes and allow yourself to hear all the sounds that are going on around you, just listen to the general hum and buzz of the world as if you were listening to music. Don't try to identify the sounds you're hearing. Don't put names on them. Simply allow them to play with your eardrums. And let them go. In other words, you could put it, let your ears hear whatever they want to hear. Don't judge the sounds. There are no, as it were, proper sounds or improper sounds, and it doesn't matter if somebody coughs or sneezes or drops something. It's all just sound. And if I am talking to you right now and you're doing this, I want you to listen to the sound of my voice just as if it were noise. Don't try to make any sense out of what I'm saying, because your brain will take care of that automatically. You don't have to try to understand anything. Just listen to the sound. As you pursue that experiment, you will very naturally find that you can't help naming sounds, identifying them, that you will go on thinking, that is to say, talking to yourself inside your head automatically. But it's important that you don't try to repress those thoughts by forcing them out of your mind, because that will have precisely the same effect as if you were trying to smooth rough water with a flat iron. You're just going to disturb it all the more. What you do is this. As you hear sounds coming up in your head, thoughts, you simply listen to them as part of the general noise going on, just as you would be listening to the sound of my voice, or just as you would be listening to cars going by, or to birds chattering outside the window. So look at your own thoughts as just noises. And soon you will find that the so-called outside world and the so-called inside world come together. They are a happening. Your thoughts are a happening, just like the sounds going on outside. And everything is simply a happening. And all you're doing is watching it. Now in this process, another thing that is happening that is very important is that you're breathing. And as you start meditation, you allow your breath to run, just as it wills. In other words, don't do at first any breathing exercise, but just watch your breath breathing the way it wants to breathe. And notice a curious thing about this. You say in the ordinary way, I breathe, because you feel that breathing is something that you are doing voluntarily, just in the same way as you might be walking or talking. But you will also notice that when you are not thinking about breathing, your breathing goes on just the same. So the curious thing about breath is that it can be looked at both as a voluntary and an involuntary action. You can feel on the one hand, I am doing it, and on the other hand, it is happening to me. And that is why breathing is a most important part of meditation, because it is going to show you, as you become aware of your breath, that the hard and fast division that we make between what we do on the one hand and what happens to us on the other is arbitrary. So that as you watch your breathing, you will become aware that both the voluntary and the involuntary aspects of your experience are all one happening. Now that may at first seem a little scary, because you may think, well, am I just the puppet of a happening, the mere passive terribly responsible position. The truth of the matter, as you will see, is that both things are true. You can see it that everything is happening to you. And on the other hand, you are doing everything. For example, it's your eyes that are turning the sun into light. It's the nerve ends in your skin that are turning electric vibrations in the air into heat and temperature. It's your eardrums that are turning vibrations in the air into sound, and in that way you are creating the world. But when we're not talking about it, when we're not philosophizing about it, then there is just this happening, and we won't give it a name.
sergeant. Yes, drill sergeant. All right, let me hear some. Go! I said I want to hear some. Let's go. He that lives. Come on, what was that? I can't hear it. Come on, go! He that outlives this day and comes safe home will stand a tiptoe when this day is named and rouse him in the name of Christmas. I didn't tell you to stop. Keep going. Keep going. Go! He that shall live this day and see old age will yearly on the vigil feast his neighbors and say, tomorrow is St. Crispin. Then will he strip his sleeves, show his scars, and say, these wounds I had on St. Crispin's day. Old men forget, yet all shall be forgotten. But he'll remember with bandages what feats he did that day. Then shall our names, familiar in his mouth as household words, Harry the King, Bedford and Exeter, Warwick and Talbot, Salisbury and Gloucester, be in their flowing cups freshly remembered. And this story shall the good man teach his son. And Crispin shall ne'er go by from this day to the end of the world. For we in it shall be remembered. We few, we happy few, we band of brothers. For he today that sheds his blood with me shall be my brother. Gentlemen in England now obey, shall think themselves accursed they were not here, and hold their manhoods cheap, whilst any speaks who fought with us on St. Crispin's Day. Got enough, drill sergeant?
rhymes like the Martians. MC Hobbs on the job, ripping rhymes like the Martians. MC Hobbs on the job, ripping rhymes like the Martians. MC Hobbs on the job, ripping rhymes like the Martians. MC Hobbs on the job, ripping rhymes like the Martians. Shit's iller than King Fear, the Shakespeare song. Started with this Prince kid, his mom's and his father. Pops got took for his pops. Son of mother by his brother, man. Now his brother's king lover, man. Acting real trick, he took his mother's life. Fuck his green, intercepts up his green. But the Prince, he ain't going for these out for revenge. His pops close, down the alley, those like your hands. So just chill and cool for now. Play the fool until you take them out. Cause all eyes is on you, so one way or the other. It's a kamikaze's not a two-wheeler to come. But either way, I gotta stay out. So what the hell? Go strap on your back and get set for the payback. Ain't got no cat, but he's more than the two. Strapped in the soul for the legacies too. But she tried to blame him for his sister's death. But she took her own last breath. She ain't got the shit left.
Never heard yet. Absurd is that? Absurd circumstance, murder and romance and so.
Excess, we had the water to rest. We had I'm no manifest. 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 Stop the dagger in the king's chest. I'm no manifest. Stop the dagger in the king's chest.
Y'all weren't stuck in this wall.
I will be the jump.
What happened back there?
Nothing. Don't worry about it. Billy, how'd you do it? How'd you morph?
I don't know.
What are you guys thinking about when we're trying to morph?
You must shed your masks to wear this armor.
Think only of each other, and the morphing grid will open to you.
Yeah, that's better.
Well, maybe it's because we don't know each other. Maybe that's why we can't morph.
Okay.
No, I'm serious. Let's do this, for real. I'm Zach, and I am a Power Ranger.
Hi, Zach.
True. I live in the Melody Mobile. It's just me and my mom. And my mom? My mom is the best! And my mom is just sick. I do what I can, but I'm scared. Sometimes I get too scared to stay there at night. Because I'm afraid
never said any of this out loud.
Well, it's cool. You're with us now.
Am I? What does that mean when all this is over? Are you Power Rangers or are you friends?